morning. Whoop. Bye. Have fun. Very pleased to introduce to you this morning Mr. McCauley. Al is the Director of Christian Formation right over at Director of Adult Formation, excuse me. There's multiple people doing Christian Formation over there at St. Mary on the Lake in Pewaukee. And since we're so close to All Saints Day, we thought it would be nice if we had a celebration of Saints today. So please welcome Al McCauley.
Good morning. Yeah, St. Anthony on the Lake is where I belong. That's in Pewaukee. But I grew up here. This is my parish. Many of you know that. How many of you have heard me before? Oh, you're all gluttons for punishment. Time off purgatory for all of you. Well, thanks for coming back. This is the parish I grew up in. This space that we're in right now was not there when we were kids. But what's that?
And you went to school over here.
And I went to school over there. Received my sacraments here. So it's like always like a homecoming of sorts. But just business-wise, to start off, everybody has a little booklet. I'm going to stop about 5 minutes before we end and give you a quick test on this. No. I taught in high school, at highest level in high school for 24 years, and I can tell you one of the things you don't do, at least with high school students, is you don't give out things like this at the beginning, because you'll know right away if you're boring them, because you're going to start reading through it. So if I see your heads down, and that pamphlet or that booklet I made is really for you to take home. So you don't have to worry about notes or anything. If you, a week from now, you're saying, what did that guy talk about? You can look up, you've got it right there in text form. You've got some interesting tidbits, hopefully. Much of what's in there I'm going to discuss this morning. Some of what's in there I will not have time to discuss, because we don't have the time for that. So reflection questions, things of that nature. So that's just for your perusal later on. So we're going to talk about saints, because we're coming up on All Saints Day, correct? And you just did an activity, or at least the family did. It sounds like with all the saints that are around the room. So this works very well. And I want to start by giving you just a very quick overview and tutorial about what we think about saints when we say saints as Catholics, okay? So we have to go back to the beginning. Christianity is one of those terms that's an umbrella term. Do you know what that means? Have you heard that phrase before, umbrella term? You look up in an umbrella and you see all those different spokes. And Christianity is the thing that covers it. So Christianity is the umbrella term, but we have all kinds of different Christian denominations. Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of Christian denominations. Did you know that? Hundreds. So it's important for us to know that if we are Roman Catholic, we are Christian. But if we're Christian, we're not necessarily Roman Catholic. Make sense? So what is it that makes us different? There's a lot of peripheral things that make Catholics different than those other denominations. We don't have married priests. We don't have female priests. Things of that nature. And there are others. There's a lot of others. But there are three real important key elements to Catholicism that are different than all those denominations. The first one is we have this guy called the Pope. Based on Matthew 16, when Jesus gave Peter the keys to the kingdom and said, you have authority on earth, we have this unbroken succession of men who have been popes, from Peter all the way down to Pope Francis. I will give $1 to anybody who can tell me how many popes we've had in our history. No looking up on your phone.
267.
266. Whoa, I almost lost $1. Francis is 266. I have to stop right there. I didn't want anybody else to guess. Francis is Pope number 266. One of the other things that separates us from those other denominations is the way we do the sacraments. Some of these Christian denominations don't have 7 sacraments. Some do. But not all of them look at the sacraments in the same way, in particular, the Eucharist. Now, you could have a talk on any of those things at any time, its own talk about the papacy and about the different sacraments, but today we're here to talk about the saints. Mary and the saints is the third fundamental difference between Catholics and other denominations. How many of you are Catholic and have ever heard from somebody who's not Catholic, hey, why do people worship Mary? And what do you say?
We don't.
We don't worship Mary. Correct. We worship only God, right? Yeah. And have you ever heard this? Why pray to the saints? Just go to the big guy. Just pray right to Christ. You heard that? Yeah, what do you say? You know, we need to understand why we pray to saints. Why is that? And so that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to unpack those things a little bit. But let's talk about these saints first. Do you know why this football team is called the Saints? New Orleans. Do you know who this guy is? Louis Armstrong, who is from New Orleans. And the song he is most known for, When the Saints Go Marching In. Because he is the favorite son of New Orleans. In fact, the airport in New Orleans is named after him. Because Louis Armstrong is such a favorite son of New Orleans, and that song is synonymous with him, the football team said, we want something that represents our area of New Orleans. And so let's pick the Saints to mirror that song, When the Saints Go Marching In. Now, when the Saints became a legitimate entity, when they were incorporated as a business, they had to choose a date. And the date they chose to be incorporated was November 1st, 1966. What's November 1st? It's All Saints Day. A little piece of useless trivia for you there. Next time with your family and friends, you can talk about that. If you're ever watching New Orleans Saints on football or whatever, you can, wow them with your information. All right. I would like you to take 10 seconds in your mind quietly to think about this question. Do you have a favorite saint? Do you? Mm-hmm. Who is it and why are they important to you? And how do you remember or honor this saint? What I'd like you to do is at your tables, just have that conversation briefly. Who is your favorite saint? Who is it? Why are they important to you? And do you do anything to remember them? Do you understand what I'm asking? Can you take a few seconds just to do that? Go ahead, and then I'll call you back. There's a St. Helen.
Yeah, I know. St. Anthony, one of my best friends. Yeah. Their book in my purse, and I pray to them every day. St. Trev, as my granddaughter does.
St. Joseph, because he answers my prayers quickly.
Right. I had to go through my prayer cards. But is it something or do you just talk?
How are we doing? I'm going to call you back if I could. It's a good question to consider if you have a favorite saint. Now, a lot of my job is to deal with saints. I study saints. I do a lot of presentations on saints. And so I would answer that first question probably different depending on what week it is. But I do have favorite saints. I can tell you probably my top 5. I'm not going to. But it's a good question to think about. And I'm hoping that you honor your saint somehow. Whether you wear a medal, maybe you have an icon of that saint, maybe you pray with them in a certain way, remember them on their feast day. All of those kinds of things are good ways to remember saints. All right. We're talking about saints, and I think it's important that we understand how the Catholic Church comes about naming or recognizing people as saints. So I'm going to give you a little bit of that real quick. The first thing that happens when somebody is investigated, if they are a saint, we call them servant of God. So I see on the people around us here, we've got somebody named Thea Bowman, who is considered servant of God, Thea Bowman. Okay? She passed away from cancer in the last century. She's buried in Memphis. But she was a nun. She's from around this area. Well, she's from Mississippi, but she was educated in La Crosse, at Viterbo. Nonetheless, her investigation for her sainthood is underway. So should we call her servant of God? The next step is, if they are considered heroic or virtuous, they're considered venerable. Venerable Archbishop Sheen. Anybody remember Archbishop Sheen?
Oh, yeah.
He's on this process. And it takes a long time, typically, for somebody to become a saint because there's a lot of investigation. They look under every stone. They want to make sure that this person does have the qualities that would make a saint. The next step up is called blessed. You are beatified and you are blessed if you have one miracle that's been attributed to you after your death, posthumously. Okay? So we have different blesseds around, like Blessed Miguel Pro, whose feast day is coming up next month. who was a martyr in Mexico in 1929, 1927. But we've got a lot of different blesseds, okay? And then one more miracle, blessed Carlo Arcudis is another one. And then one more miracle, a second miracle attributed to them, then they would become saint. And the word canon, canonization, we talk about being canonized. The word canon means list. And so when they become a saint, they're just added to the list. They're one of those marching in that number, you know, that song from that we talked about earlier. Now, does this all make sense to you? I'm going to stop for two reasons. There's two things I want to say to you. This is not how it always was. Making a saint used to be a lot different, especially pre-medieval times. People lived in their villages and they rarely went outside their villages. So what would happen is, we would have a village. I'm going to pick on this table because I know these people. If this is its own village, and each table you're at is its own village, you rarely interact with each other. But let's say this table was just got to know each other very well. And Patrick here was so well known and so well liked and so well loved and such a good guy that when he passed away, everybody else referred to him as Sancta Patricius, Saint Patrick. He was set apart. He was so holy that we started calling him Saint Patrick. Not to be confused with the actual St. Patrick of Ireland, right? But that would happen. Now, on the rare occasion, someone from another village would interact with these people, and they would hear about St. Patrick. If they came to this village, there might be a chapel named after him, and they'd say, tell us about this Patrick guy. And they would be, wow, you'd be, wow, this guy was really great. You'd go back to your village and tell everybody else about him, and that's all it took. It didn't take miracles. It didn't take any of the process that we have now. And so the church said, you know what, this could get out of hand. I mean, we don't know if these people are really calling him a saint for the right reasons. I'm sure they have the best of intentions, but you get my point. So the church said we have to have a unified way of coming up with who we recognize as saints. And that's the process that I just went through with you. Now, this has been tweaked over the ages as well. But if you want to be a saint today, and by virtue of our baptism, that's our job description, we're all called to be saints, that's what we were going to go through. Now, you know what fine print is, right? There's always got to be a caveat, and the church has a caveat. The church, either through a church council or the Pope himself, can bypass the whole situation and go right to sainthood. It's called equivalent canonization. Did you know this?
Yes.
John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, was made a saint in 2014. One miracle attributed to him, but he was so holy, so virtuous, it was considered that we can bypass that second miracle. Make sense? You heard of Oscar Romero? See his image back there? Former Archbishop of El Salvador, died in 1980. He was a martyr for the faith. Was shot while saying the Mass. No miracles attributed to him posthumously. Holy and virtuous, equivalent canonization. He is now Saint Oscar Romero. So there's always, the church always has a way to bypass or circumvent the system, you know? So there's hope for all of us then, you know? It just is. Yes?
Did you know, or did anybody else know that there has been a family, a Polish family, they totally beatified the entire family. They were killed by the Nazis because they were harboring Jews. As the woman died, her baby was born, and they killed the baby also.
Oh, wow.
I
did not know about that.
Anybody wants an article on it? I've got 2 articles on it. It's just absolutely unbelievable. But that's the way it is.
So if you would like more information about that, Ellen Martino after the talk here, that sounds that might take different. I'm not aware of that. I'm waiting for the Irish Catholic family, you know, to be elevated to sanctity. But anyway, so we call these people that we're talking about, we call them the communion of saints. You've heard this word, right? We say this in our creed. We believe in the communion of saints. So I think it's important that we talk about what exactly it is to say the communion of saints. And there's some questions I want to ask you and see what you think about this. To be a saint, do you have to be dead or alive? Yeah, there's no such thing as a living saint. Did you know that? My mom and dad might be, you know, living saints. My mom a little bit more than dad, maybe. No, I'm kidding. But you've heard that phrase, right? Oh, you're a living saint. You can't be a living saint in a technical sense of the church, right? You have to be dead physically, but alive spiritually in heaven. Make sense? All right. Second question. Oops. Whoa. What happened? Do we worship? Oh, come on. Do we worship or honor saints? Honor. We talked about this. We do not worship anybody but God. Very good. Do we pray to or do we pray with the saints? It's a trick question. It's both.
Pray to them for their
Let me ask you this. If I was going through a tough time right now, and I really needed help, and I would go to somebody and say, will you pray for me? Have you ever done that? Yeah. So you ask people to pray for you. You're going to ask them. You're praying to them to pray for you. But you also might say, listen, will you sit and pray with me? So we do both. Saints do both. We pray to them. We pray to ask them for their intercession, for their help. But we pray with them. We hope and believe that they are praying for us in heaven. This is the way I'd explain it. If you think of a saint in your mind, St. Francis of Assisi, great guy, would you agree? Good guy, did good things. Do you think his good works, his good example stopped when he died physically? If we believe that he is in heaven, alive in heaven spiritually, why would he not continue to want to affect good in this world? And so that's our belief as Catholics. So when we say we believe in the communion of saints, everything I'm talking about is part of it. All right. The Catholic Catechism says this. You don't have to read all this, but it's in the blue. It's really important. We are all pilgrims on earth. We are part of the communion of saints with the dead who are being purified, meaning they're where? Purgatory, and the blessed in heaven. We're all in this relationship, this whole relationship called the communion of saints. The merciful love of God and his saints is always attentive to our prayers. This is what we read in our Catholic Catechism. So, again, don't think that just because someone's dead, that they're done affecting good in the world and in your life. And this is, if I had one favorite phrase of all time, this is probably it. I've said this a bazillion times in my life. We don't need saints to reach God. God uses saints to reach us. If you know or love somebody who is not Catholic, who says, why do you not just pray to God? Why pray to saints? I would say this quote. We don't need saints to reach God. We don't. But God uses saints to reach us because there are thousands, literally thousands of saints. And everyone in this room can identify or relate to or be challenged by a different saint. And I would suggest maybe a different saint depending on what time of life you're in. It can change, in other words. God knows that, and so he puts these people in our lives to help bring us back to himself. So we don't need saints, but God uses them to get to us. Does that make sense? That's a really good answer to anybody who ever says, why pray to saints? That's why. That might be. All right. I'm going to give you 3 metaphors for the communion of saints. This is a disco ball. When would you see a disco ball in use? At a nightclub, at a party, wedding reception, prom, times of joy, celebration. Regardless of what happens, we are Easter people. Christ is risen. Love is one. And so we should be people of joy. That's what we're called to. We're called to be people of joy. Let's connect this, though, to the communion of saints. When you think about this, it's always used in that celebratory context. Notice that there are many different tiles on this thing. They're all a little bit different shaped, and they're a different position on the orb that they're on. But they're all there, right? You don't have just one mirrored tile, correct? You have many. Because we work best in community. How effective would a disco ball be with only one little tile? Not very much. We work best in community. And we're all the same because in our humanness, but we all have different roles to play. As St. Paul says, there are different gifts, but the same Spirit, right? But this is the other thing. Think about what those tiles do. Do they give off light? No. They reflect the light. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to be people of joy, to work in community, and to reflect the light of God to others. We're not the source of the light. We're not the source of the grace. We are to reflect it to others. Does that make sense? Communion of saints. Second metaphor. I graduated from Marquette in 1989. I still get calls asking for money. I still get, it's always the same. It's some person, a live person, who will say, hi, my name's Mary. I'm from Marquette University. I'm a sophomore. I'm just calling to update our records. So they go through the address and all that. You graduated this year and all that kind of stuff. And while I have you on the phone, I'd like to talk to you about an initiative we have with all alumni. We're asking if you could contribute $50. Yeah, you've all heard this before?
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't go to Marquette anymore. But I went there, and so I can represent Marquette, can I not? I can still go to their sporting events. I can still write them a check if I want to. I can still support the people that are there. And I would suggest that saints are kind of like that. There are people like us who have graduated, but they still support us. They still have our backs. They still want the best for us. Here's my third analogy. Please, I don't have to tell you who this is, right?
No.
One call, that's all.
There you go. There you go. I do not get any kind of royalty for showing this guy. Okay, nothing. But because I knew you'd recognize him, I wanted to use this. Now, let's say, God forbid, on the way home today, my wife and I are driving home and we get rear-ended in an accident, and we've got whiplash. We have to go to the hospital. We're whatever. What do we do? If we feel like we've been wronged, what can we do? We can sue, right? And we could go and, as you said, one call, that's all. We can talk to someone. Why couldn't I just do it myself? You know the law says I can do that? If I want to sue somebody, I have the right to defend myself in court. I can be my own lawyer. Did you know that? Yep. But you know what I don't know? I don't know the law very well. I really don't know the judge, and I really don't know the proper decorum to act in a courtroom. So I don't know if that's the best idea. I'm going to get somebody who knows those things on my side. I want an advocate to help me. So I'm going to call a lawyer. Now, there are different types of lawyer. Am I going to call a tax lawyer? A patent lawyer? A divorce lawyer? No. I'm going to call a personal injury lawyer because that's the specific case I have. And that lawyer hopefully will help me to better understand the law and better approach the judge. Are you catching my analogy here? We have saints in our lives that we pray to, patron saints who have specific gifts that we feel that we can call on given a situation. Why? Because they know God in a way that we don't. They know the faith in a way that we don't. And so they can help us better approach God. And so those are my metaphors for communion of saints. So I'm going to ask you a question. At your tables again, just take a few minutes to answer this question and think about this. Saints come in all packages, all sizes. All the pictures around me that you see of the saints that Jess put up. You know, they're men, they're women, they're old, they're young, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, African, doesn't matter. They're all over the place, rich, poor. Is there anything, some specific characteristic or virtue that all saints seem to have in common? Do you understand the question? Can you at your tables just have that conversation real quick? What virtues or characteristics do you think all saints share, even though they're vastly different people? Right. I'll give you a minute.
I would say humility. I would suspect humility, but I don't know that. Because some of these saints, maybe not so humble. You know? Yes? I would say humility is pretty necessary. I think they have to be humble before they die.
I'll have to ask you to give me information on a couple things. Yeah, please do. Okay, go ahead. Great.
What else? They're humble.
How are we doing? Anybody want to share what they came up with? By the way, I have 3 possible answers of my own. It doesn't mean they're right. I think there's multiple answers to this. So I don't want you to feel like, well, I'm going to say the wrong thing. That's please. It always takes one to start the ball rolling. Anybody want to tell me what he came up with at your table?
Devotion.
Yes, please. Service. Good. In some way, shape, or form, they are people of service. Good. I like it. Anybody else?
Live the life devoted to God.
Live the life devoted to God. Very good. Excellent. Yes. Anybody else?
Selfless.
Selfless. Right. Sacrifice. Good. These are great.
Love.
Love. I don't want to put mine up on the screen now because these are really good. No. Anybody else? One more. Yes.
A strong faith that they're willing to suffer for.
Strong faith that they are willing to suffer for. Yeah. You know, that's a really good point. I'm going to start with that. These are my 3 that I came up with. Saints are real people, first of all. I get the impression sometimes, especially when you talk about saints that have great legends about them, that sometimes we think they weren't real, or that they're lived so long ago, we don't know much about them historically, so we're afraid to say that they're real. But they're real people. But to go back on what you said, they're people that struggled. They suffered. They sinned, like all of us. I think it's the worst thing that we can do is to put saints on such a pedestal as to think that's something I could never do. I could never be like that. I could never be that holy. The reality is we all can be that holy. It's in spite of those things, the struggles, the suffering, the sins, that we can become saints. The second thing is, I thought saints are all humble. At some point, they realize it's not about them. It's really about God's grace, working through them to affect change, to do the service that they do, to be selfless like they are. All of those things that you said. I think there's inherent humility. And then the third one I said was I think they encourage each other, and others. If not actually in their time, certainly by their example. You know, how they live their lives is an example for us. And so we are encouraged by that, by their faith, by their heroism, by their courage, all of that stuff. So I'm going to give you an example that covers all three. And if we had time, I'd show you the actual clip from this. I'm not going to just this overhead view. How many of you have seen any of the series The Chosen? It's fantastic. Just fantastic. There's a scene in there, when you all know, this is Luke 5, when Jesus calls his first disciples. He calls Simon and he calls his brother Andrew. And after a long night of fishing and being unsuccessful, Jesus says, go out again and throw your nets out. Do you remember this story? And what does Peter say right away? Hey, we've been doing this all night. I'm tired. But what does he do? He says, if you say it, I'm fine. I'm going to go out. And I almost wonder if Peter's like, I'll show you, you know. I'm not going to catch a thing, and you're going to see. But he goes out and he throws the net, and what happens? We all know what happens. What happens? Tons of fish, right? To the point where the nets are breaking, they got to get help, right? Now, what's interesting about that is, I'll ask you this. Do you think Peter was able to catch those fish because of anything he was doing? He clearly proved he couldn't catch fish the whole dang night. It was God's grace that entered into the moment. But here's the clicker, and here's the thing that's important for you and I. If Peter doesn't go out again and throw his nets out, is that miracle going to happen? At some point, we have to as St. Augustine would say, cooperate, co-work with God's grace. We have to have a sense of humility that Peter said, I don't want to do this, but I'll do it again. How many times have you said, I've been praying for the same thing for my whole life, and it doesn't change? Can I pray one more day? And then can I pray the next day? Sometimes it's not easy, is it? It's not, but it's something we stick with. That humility to say, God will make it happen. Can I throw my nets out again? Can I cast out into the deep again? That's really important. And because of that humility, Simon goes on shore and he says, you are God. He says, you're the Messiah. Depart from me. I'm a sinful man. And Jesus says, you're going to be catching not fish, but men. And so what does Peter go on to do? He goes on to encourage others. Yes?
That makes me think that there's another attribute of the saints.
Please.
That when they hear God speak or ask them of something of them, they say yes.
Yeah. That saints say yes when God is asking them of something. When we hear the will of God in our lives somehow, do we say yes? Yeah, good. Not always easy, but definitely good. I like it. There's a Catholic mom and blogger named Jessica Archuleta, and she wrote this, and I just love this. When we rob saints of their humanity, we rob them of their virtue. And then they can't be real examples to us to lead us closer to God as they should. It's very important that we understand it as Catholics that saints are not perfect. They are not gods. They are not ideal creatures. They have goodness given to them by God, as do all of us. It's the way we respond to that and cooperate or co-work with God's goodness that makes the difference. If there's any example of this humanity of a saint that's really human, it's St. Augustine. He's one of my favorites. Now, I don't know if you know the story of St. Augustine, but I love this portrait of him, which he wouldn't have looked anything like this, by the way. But this is a painting done of him. Augustine lived right around year 400, okay? He's one of the greatest thinkers in church history. And in his autobiography called The Confessions, he just beats himself up. He's just painfully truthful about what plagues him. He's got all kinds of issues. As a kid, he stole. He lied to his parents. He got into fights. He was consumed with what other people thought of him, and he wanted to fit in. Peer pressure, whatever you want to call it today. And by his own admission, even well into adulthood, he was plagued by one particular sin. Anybody know St. Augustine and know what it is?
Lust.
Lust. Lust. It troubled him mightily. It vexed him. It was so bad on him and such a grip on him. He famously writes in there, he prays, he says, I would pray to God for chastity and say, please heal me of this, but not yet. Because he didn't want to give it up. Think about how many times, you know what, that diet I got to get up next week. I'm starting that diet, right? We put these things off all the time. When New Year's comes around, that'll be my resolution, you know. We do this all the time. He was a human being that was able to succeed because he finally listened to and cooperated with God's grace. I love this portrait. If you can see what's going on in the top left, it's the light of Christ, and it says veritas, which is Latin for truth. And he is holding his heart, and it's on fire. He's got this passion, this deep passion that's drawing to him. And it took him a while, but as he got older, he's leaning more toward the light of Christ, the truth of God. But boy, that sin is always there, tugging at him. And that, I would suggest all of us have that tendency toward, do I want to listen to the sinful part, or do I want to look to God? Would you agree with that? This is not time for confession. I'm just, no discussion, no conversation. But I love this interplay between those two things, because what makes Augustine a saint, was he smart? Yes. Was he virtuous and holy? I bet yes, he was. But in my mind, what makes him really a saint is that he saw this struggle, and yet with God's help, he was able to overcome it to some extent. And that's what we can all do. So I think he's a great example for that. Just to convince you that sanctity, that being a saint is for everybody. I love this quote from Pope Francis. To be saints is not the privilege of a few. It's a vocation for everyone. St. Francis de Sales, who lived in the 17th century, another great thinker of the church. I love this too. It's heresy. It's a false teaching to say that devotion is incompatible with the life of a soldier, a tradesman, a prince, or a married woman. In other words, everybody is called to this life. It's not just for a select few. It's not just for some miracle people. It's for everybody. Now, we've got a few minutes left, and I just want to tie this in. What does this have to do with Halloween? Did you know there's a connection? Mm-hmm. Yeah, All Hallows Eve, exactly. I want to talk about this a little bit. Hallowed evening, or hallow, which means holy evening, it's a contraction. Halloween is a contraction for that. And Halloween is one of these days that we can take to celebrate, because the next day is All Saints' Day, and the day after that is All Souls' Day. So we've got a lot going on here, right? What's interesting about this is there are Catholic roots to this festival we call Halloween. I think it's gone full circle. It was secular, became Christian and Catholic, and now it's becoming secular again. Okay? But just to reclaim a little bit of that, I want to talk about this. There was a feast day, and just after the year 600, the Pope at the time said, we need to remember all of those people who died for their faith. Those martyrs, there's so many martyrs that we know by name, but there's more that we don't know by name at all. We don't know who they were. But they were still courageous. And we can have a feast day that encompasses all of them. So he started, I think the year was 609, a feast of All Saints' Day, and it was scheduled on May 13th. That's when he had it done. 2 centuries later, the Pope at the time said, you know what, we got to move it to November 1st. And why did he move it to November 1st? Because what's going on in Europe at that time, especially in Northern Europe, but in Europe, throughout Europe, there was a huge, almost universal celebration of a feast called Samhain. Can you say Samhain? You just spoke ancient Gaelic. Samhain. It means summer's end. And it was kind of like a harvest festival. But it was also a Day of the Dead, because what are we doing? We're taking in all the crops. We're recognizing that the ground, everything's going to die because we're getting into winter. And we're going to celebrate that. And we don't just celebrate the crops that died, that we're taking in the food that will feed us. We're going to remember those people in our lives that have passed away as well. So it's kind of like a harvest festival meets the Day of the Dead kind of a thing. Okay? And so November 1st was chosen to coincide with this celebration. Now, just to give you a little bit of insight to Samhain, what people would do is, this was like a days-long festival that started on November 1st. People would dress up And they would dress up in costumes so that the spirits of the dead would not recognize them and haunt them. What do we do what do kids do at Halloween? And adults, they dress up, do they not? They put on costumes, they wear masks. The original thought was we don't want the spirits to haunt us. That was the idea. And the Pope is like, we should remember the spirits, the good spirits. We should pray to those people who have died. We should remember them. Something else they did at Samhain was people would make what's called soul cakes. Have you ever heard of soul cakes? Soul cakes were made, they're very simple, but they're sweetened, either with honey. Sugar was a hard commodity to come by, but honey was a natural thing. But they were sweetened, and people would give them out to anybody, revelers, beggars, anybody, and say, I will give you a soul cake if you will pray for anybody in my house who has died that year. Pray for their soul. So we would give out soul cakes in exchange for prayers. So people were fed and people were prayed for. It was like a double thing. Now, how is that echoed in today's Halloween? Yeah. Do we not give out candy at Halloween? Can I just say, as an aside, that this is false advertising? Because I look at, like, peanut M&Ms, I love peanut M&Ms. Okay? Absolute favorite. It says fun size. But if you open that up, there's like 6 of them in there. If it was truly fun size, it'd be the pound bag, right? That's not even like gleeful. I mean, it's kind of like ho-hum size, you know? 6 M&Ms is not enough to get me going. Yeah. Anyway. But these celebrations of Samhain that people would do, these things should remind us of our Catholic faith. That was the idea of it. So let's go a little bit further in this. I would say there are 2 lessons we can learn from this celebration of Samhain that became Halloween, and they coincide with what we were just talking about with regard to the saints. And the first lesson, I think, is humility. We're told by St. Peter, I love this, clothe yourselves with humility in your dealings with one another, for God opposes the proud. God opposes the proud. It's interesting because if you read St. Augustine's Confessions, and the very first thing he writes is that from 1 Peter. Is God opposes the proud. He's saying, listen, I'm going to write to you about my life, which was filled with nothing but pride. And I didn't get it because I was a knucklehead until the very end when I realized that you've heard this phrase before, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. Right? So we have to have humility. Think about a pumpkin. If anybody have pumpkins out on their porch or anything, have you carved them yet? Are you going to? You get a pumpkin out of the field, what do you do to it? You wash it up, right? You clean it up. You get it ready. You open it up. You scoop out the guts, the bad stuff. That's what we're called to do. Out of humility, we've got to get rid of that bad stuff. We've got to put on a face that's going to be putting on the face of humility. So we carve faces into these pumpkins. These things should remind us of our faith. Do they always? You can go by and see scary images on pumpkins. And I would say if you can see things through the lens of your faith, it's going to make the difference. Whether they intended to carve it that way or not, I can see it that way. Does that make sense? So it's important to have that lesson of humility. That was the one thing I said about saints. My other one I said about saints is encouragement. And St. Paul says to the Thessalonians, encourage one another and build one another up as indeed you do. I think it's interesting because when you carve a pumpkin, what do you do with it? After you've got it carved and hollowed out, what do people put in it? A candle. And that candle shines out there and it's a light to others. It's encouraging others. It's attracting them to want to look at the pumpkin, in that case, or the jack-o'-lantern. And I'm saying that's what we do. We have the light of Christ in us. We all do. And we're called to be that encouragement for others. The way I act, the way I talk, is that bringing Christ to others? Am I being saintly in that? You know? Something to think about. I have about a 90-second video clip I want to play for you. And I think it does a really good job of explaining these 2 virtues of humility and encouragement. And it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just going to let it play. And you don't have to worry about the sound or anything, but you're going to need to read the text, okay, that's on there to understand what's going on here. And then I'm going to come back. Can you read that okay? Or do I need to read it? see humility in that clip? The handshake, hugging, holding off on his celebration. You know, as a diehard Bears fan, oh my gosh, it's tough living in Packer country. I would love for Packer fans to take a little bit more humility. Especially, oh my gosh, my team is so bad, they're woeful. Pity, please. Anywhere else that you saw humility in that clip? Did the older gentleman show humility at all? What could have he said? He was clearly distraught. You know how big soccer is in Europe. He could have pushed him away. He said, the loss was raw, it was real. He could have said, I want nothing to do with you, kid. I would say both those people in that video clip showed great humility. And the idea of holding off in the celebrations, usually it's like in your face kind of thing. So it's amazing how that is there. Where did you notice encouragement? Can you say it louder?
The little boy was kind of patting him on the arm's back, like, it's okay.
Yes. The little boy is patting him on the back, it's okay. And the guy came back, and he actually showed encouragement too by doing what? What did the older guy do? Yeah, he hugged him, he kissed his head and everything else. I would love to know where these two people are in life and to follow up and say what if that incident even meant anything to him or whatever. Anywhere else you saw encouragement? Yeah, please.
Human to human identification, respect. They recognized each other as a human person.
Think we need a little bit more of that in our world these days? Yeah. If you didn't hear what she said recognizing each other as humans, that human-to-human contact and connection and recognition of one's equal dignity, I suppose, and humanity. It's just a great thing. Let me ask you this. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer this. Are any of you encouraged by that video? Just rhetorical. Think about that. Does this make me feel like one of those times I could be showing humility? One of those times I could be showing more encouragement? Because again, our baptism, by virtue of our baptism, we're all called to be saints at some point, hopefully sooner than later. So, with that, I'm going to say thank you for coming here and ask if you have any questions or thoughts about anything I talked about today. Any questions or comments? Please.
I'd like to offer some encouragement to a Bears fan.
I don't have an hour. I'm going to need that much.
Just remember, sports is fun.
Yes.
It's not important.
I know. I appreciate that.